Gatewatch limited review. We're going to cover the cards for draft, for sealed, and we're going to cover the two-headed giant format. And some of the cards here pick up quite a bit because of that. So we're going to be kind of talking about the cards in all three of those aspects. We're going to do white, blue, black, red, green, and then I'm going to put the multicolor, artifact, colorless, and lands all together. We're going to take a teeny break in between each one just so I can catch my breath, and I'll pop up about a minute or two after that. Alright, guys. Starting off with one of the weirdest cards, our white Eldrazi. So apparently there had been planned to be more, but there's only one in this set. Eldrazi Displacer. 2 white for a 3/3 Eldrazi. Devoid. So it's colorless. 2 and a colorless. Remember, you have to pay using a colorless source for this, whether it's from a waste or a mana producer that produces a specific colorless mana. You can't use a mountain, you can't use a swamp, etc. for that diamond right there. So 2 and a colorless. Exile another target creature, then return it to the battlefield, tapped under its owner's control. Very powerful card. It's a rare. I think it's one of the top cards that you can pick. If I was in a pack, I would almost always pick this card. It doesn't necessarily have to go in the Devoid decks so much as it just goes in a white deck. It's a very powerful white effect. You do need to find a way to have a colorless source to make it work, but its base level is 3/3 for 3, which is already a card that I'm happy to have. So I would rate that card fairly highly in draft. It'd be a card I have to first pick and go into white for, and it's an extremely powerful effect in sealed as well. Atha Protector, 2 and a white for a 1/4 vigilance, human soldier ally. I want to point out before we keep going, all people that look like they would be an ally will be an ally in this set. It's not going to be the weird thing last set where there's creatures that look almost identical and some are allies and some aren't, and it's random for balance issues. Everybody's an ally. That's just how it is. So, if you have a picture and it looks like an ally instead of like some sort of random beast creature thing that wouldn't be an ally, because allies are like humanoid races, they'll be an ally, which is a big deal. One of the main abilities here we'll get to later is Cohort, which cares quite a bit about allies. Now, 2 and a white for a 1/4 vigilance, I think is actually going to perform quite well. I think that the defensive speed, like how quickly you can play good defensive cards, just like in the last set, we had our wall for 1 and a white for an 0/6, which was quite good. I think 2 and a white for a 1/4 vigilance will also be quite good. Another important thing to remember is that with the Cohort ability, where we're going to tap allies, having vigilance means he can attack and activate a Cohort. I don't think it's a kind of a top pick or anything, but I do think it is a very solid card. Like on a scale of, let's use A to F, I would rate Eldrazi Displacer somewhere around like a B or a B+, probably a B+, it's so powerful. Atha Protector to me is going to be a C. And a C is a card I always want to play. I'm going to play these cards most of the time in my deck. I'm going to be satisfied with this card most of the time in the deck. It fits in a lot of what white is trying to do with the cohorts and the allies. It's a card that plays defense well, but if you have a way to make it stronger, it powers up there too. It's going to be a good wall or a good roadblock against the more aggressive decks. I would play this in both sealed and draft frequently, and I think you'll be happy to see it, at least for the first copy or two. I don't think I'd run more than 2 usually. Alright, and it's a common. Allied Reinforcements, 3 and a white for sorcery uncommon. Put 2/2 white knight ally creatures onto the battlefield. So you're paying 3 and a white for 4 power and 4 toughness across 2 bodies. It's a very powerful effect. Support is one of the main abilities in this set, so more bodies is more important. Remember, support puts a counter on up to the number is. So if it said support 4, you could choose up to 4 creatures and put 1/1 counter on each. So if you have more bodies, your support abilities, your support 3 is much more powerful if this specific card makes 2 creatures. So that's something really important to think about, that 1/4/4 in this format with support is probably worse than 2/2/2s. And Cohort also benefits from having more bodies. So I think that this will be a higher pick. To me, this card looks like it's probably like a B- or a B. It's a card that I would be very, very happy to have in many of the decks. It's the kind of card that you can start a white deck around because it plays well with Cohort, it plays well with support, you can go in multiple different decks, and at its worst, paying 4 for 4 power and 4 toughness is fairly powerful. Call of the Gatewatch, 2 and a white, search your library for a Planeswalker card, reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle it. I do not want to play this card. I will not play this card. I cannot think of many times I'd ever want to play this card. Let's say you're playing Sealed and you have one of these and you have a Gideon. If you can build your deck that you don't have to play Call the Gatewatch, you probably should. Because sometimes you'll draw Gideon and then you'll draw this dead card. That's not worth it. The only time I play Call of the Gatewatch is if I just absolutely had to have Gideon in that match to win, and he was the only card that was going to win me the game. So for me, this card gets essentially an F. I will never play it in Draft or Sealed unless something really weird or funky is going on. If you have like 3 Planeswalkers, then sure. Also, good job on having 3 Planeswalkers. You're the best. Dazzling Reflection is 1 and a white for an instant. You gain life equal to target creature's power. The next time that creature would deal damage this turn, prevent that damage. So this card gains you quite a bit of life. It essentially, if your opponent attacks with a 3/3, it stops 3 damage and then gains you 3 life. I'm not sure if that effect is particularly good on its own, and it has to, for you to get a lot of value out of this card, it involves attacking or blocking. So if your opponent's attacking with a creature, is usually where it's going to get. Well, let's say they're attacking with a 5/5. Now, I'm not usually going to play a card that's just preventing damage, but the fact that it prevents that damage to any source means that you can gain block on it. So I can play my Dazzling Reflection on their 5/5 attacker and block with my 3/2/2s. And now my 3/2/2s killed it in combat, and the Dazzling Reflection did good work. So I don't think that this card is particularly awful. It is a combat trick that can be used more defensively than offensively, because offensively, if you attack your 3/3 and they block with a 3/3, then good job, you got your card's worth out of it. But if you attack your 2/2s in, then it can be a little trickier, or if they block with multiple creatures, your creature can still die, in which case, you traded 2 cards for 1, and that's not particularly spectacular. Small note, this does not work well with Double Strike. Remember, it only prevents damage the 1 time on the turn, so that can be a little bit tricky. I'm going to give this card a D+. It's a card I do not want to usually play, but if I'm in a less than optimal deck, I'll play it and hope to use it more on blocks and attacks. Expedition Raptor. 3 white for a 2/2 bird. Now, this is just a bird. It's not an ally. You can tell it's just a bird flying around out there. It's not a human bird or anything like that. It has flying, and when it enters the battlefield, support 2. So that means 2 other creatures. So if I have 1 creature and no other creatures other than the Expedition Raptor, I can only choose the creature that isn't the Expedition Raptor. If I have no other creatures when I play the Expedition Raptor, it's a 2/2 for 5. If I have 4 other creatures, I can choose 2 of the creatures that aren't the Raptor and put 1/1 counters on each one. It's not you can do it to your opponent's cards as well. I will say that support with Smite the Monstrous does do something. If they have a 3/3, you can make it a 4/4 and smite it. That's not the coolest thing in the whole world. You're not going to do it often, but that's really the only time I think you're going to support your opponent's creatures. That said, 5 for a 2/2 flying is bad. But 5 mana for 4 power and toughness, 2 of which is flying, and 2 of which is spread out, is decent. Expedition Raptor is one of the cards that benefits the more support cards you have. If it's the only support card in your deck, it's only okay. If there are other cards that can support upon the flying creature, it's better. It's one of the reasons that I liked the Atha Protector, is that you can support on this. This can go from a 1/4 to a 2/5 to a 3/6. When you have a 3/6 Vigilance, that's a real threat. That's a hard card to deal with. That's a lot of toughness on attacking and blocking. Expedition Raptor gains that same sort of advantage. Being a 2/2 on your base is not too impressive for 5 mana, but having flying and knowing that you can get more stuff and more value out is pretty solid. That said, I don't think I want to run too many of these. This is a C- for me. It's a card I will play, but I would avoid playing it if I could help it, unless it fits in that specific deck where it's very good. General Tazari is 4 and a white for a 3/4. Legendary creature, human ally. When it enters the battlefield, you may search for an ally card, creature card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. It also has 1 of each color. Ally creatures you control get +X/+X, where X is the number of colors among those creatures. You do not need to rate this card based on the 5-color ability. If you have 5 colors, big bonus. That's great. It'll give at least +1/+1, probably way more. Let's look at the important stuff that you're usually going to get out of this card in limited, drafted, sealed usually. 4 and a white for a 3/4. A little bit below where we want to be, but not too bad considering it gets us another card from our deck. So if you have a couple of decent allies, if I have one other impressive ally to go with General Tezzeri, I'm happy. If I have two, then I think it's a very playable card. This is the card that's going to get you another card of your choice to your hand when you play it. Every time you play it. So I think it's a powerful enough effect that I'm going to give this card a B. It's a card I want to pick early. It's a card that's going to put me into the ally deck. We're going to talk more about it later, but the fact that the 5-color lands are common makes allies and multicolor allies much more powerful, which in turn makes General Tezzeri a more powerful card. Immolating Glare is 1 and white for an instant. Destroy target attacking creature. Simple. Effective. Powerful card. Your opponents are usually going to be attacking with multiple small creatures or one bigger creature, and this does well on either front. 2 to kill one big creature is just awesome. You kill their, I don't know, Kozilek. Let's say Kozilek. Bam! Awesome, it's dead. You killed their best drop in there. Or whatever their big fatty is. On the other hand, it only costs 2, so it's very powerful at answering multiple small creatures efficiently because it's only 2 mana removal spell. It's not costing 4 or 5 like a lot of removal spells we see, and even cheap red removal tends to cost 2 or 3 at this point. So just costing 2 is pretty effective. The downsides are you have to leave the mana up. The good news is at 2, it's hard to play around. Like just having 2 mana up, like let's say you play a 4-drop on turn 6 or 7, and you have 2 mana up, it's not really obvious. You just spent most of your mana. Having 2 up is pretty normal. In the early game, you can just play a 2-drop and then have 2 mana up. So it's not too hard to defend angle to have the 2 mana open. The only thing I really don't like about this is if you are an extremely aggressive deck, it is not a very good card for you. That said, I think it's like another B. It's a card I'm going to pick very highly. It's a card that I'll first pick on with some frequency, and I'll always be happy to run as many as I can get. Iona's Blessing. 3 and a white. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2, has vigilance, and can block an additional creature. This is a powerful aura. +2/+2 in vigilance is a powerful effect. We've seen that at this cost on cards before, and it's been close to worth it. And sometimes definitely worth it. The blocking additional creature can be good. It is good with the vigilance. I don't think I'm normally going to play this card. I would need a reason. I'd have to have creatures that really cared about with powerful effects to make it happen. I haven't seen any white cards that I would consider putting it on yet. This is the first card I'm going to mention for Two-Headed Giant. Blocking an additional creature is a very powerful effect because there will be more creatures, and there will usually be more mid and small creatures than you're used to, just because people will be running more cards in general. On the other hand, there's more removal in general, so this is a higher risk, higher reward card in Two-Headed Giant, and keep that in mind if you need more blocking power, but also know that auras are even riskier when you have a second opponent. Isolation Zone. Iona's Blessing, I think, to me is like a D+, C- card. I'm not sure where exactly I'm on that. It could go either way. I'm not going to usually want to run it. I play very conservatively with my card advantage, and I don't know if it's quite powerful enough to push me to really wanting to play it, but I could see myself being wrong on that one. Isolation Zone is 2 white, enchantment. When Isolation Zone enters the battlefield, exile target creature or enchantment an opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. So it's removal. It's unconditional removal for 2 white. Down. It's at common. I will definitely play these. It is important to remember that we have cards like Feldar Cub, which sacrifice to kill an enchantment. Makes this a little bit worse, but more importantly, just makes Feldar Club a lot better. I will play as many of these as I get. To me, this is a B-. It's a great piece of removal. At 4 mana, it's getting it completely off the field. If you have processing cards, remember you can take the cards that are in exile and process them to the graveyard, and they don't come back after Isolation Zone leaves the battlefield. Just like we saw with Stasis Snare. So this is just a worse Stasis Snare, and I was always happy to first pick Stasis Snare. I might not be as happy on first picking Isolation Zone. It's not as powerful, but being able to get rid of enchantments does help shore up that just a little bit. Of course, Scythe Master. This is one of the first cards that I think is more format dependent than many other ones. I'm excited to run it. It's 2 and a white for a 3/1 core soldier ally. As long as it's attacking, it has first strike. I like playing a 3/1 that attacks well. This is not a good blocking card. It's not a terrible blocking card. One of the problems with attacking with a 3/1 is they could have an Eldrazi Scion they could trade. That doesn't happen here. They would have to have 4 Eldrazi Scions. That's a pretty good trade for you. So, attacking-wise, this card is very strong. Defensively, it's not going to do well if your opponent's attacking with a 2/1 or a 1 power creature with like some sort of ability. But the fact of the matter is, you get to choose where you're blocking on blocks. So if they attack with a 3/3 or a 4/3, the Broodhunter Worm or whatnot, you can block it with your Core Scythe Master. It'll trade. That's okay. There is the deficiency of 1 toughness is easy to deal with. There are cards that deal 1 damage, lots of them, and this card's weak to those. So play these cards with that in mind. If you're in a more aggressive deck, I think this card's like a C+. And if you're in a normal deck, I think it's like a C. I think you'll run generally as many as you get and be happy with them on offense and defensive. Core Sky Climber is 2 and a white for a 3/2 Core Soldier ally as well. And you can pay 1 and a white to give it flying until the end of turn. I think this is another powerful card. I'm happy to have it. I don't think it's quite as good as Core Scythe Master. There's probably going to be a lot of ways to use your mana. But it's a solid C. It's right in the middle. It can gain flying. It can block well. A 3/2 flyer is good on offense and defense when you have the mana. And when you don't, a 3/2 fly on the ground is also just fine. You're going to notice a lot of creatures have 2 toughness here too. All right, let's look at a mythic. We've got Lin Valla the Preserver for 4 white. You get a 5/5 flying legendary angel. That's already playable. Yay, we made it. There's a little bit more text though. When it enters the battlefield, if an opponent has more life than you, you gain 5. When it enters the battlefield, if an opponent has more creatures than you, put a 3/3 white angel into play with flying. So this is very powerful. It's going to catch you up. To me, this is like probably an A-, or yeah, to me it's an A-. This is the kind of card that's doing everything I want it to do. I'm behind the board on life and creatures. Well, I got 8 power of flying and 8 power of toughness and 5 life for 6 mana. It's a great deal. It's going to catch you up. It's very easy for your opponent to have more creatures than you in the set because there are so many creatures. And the same thing if you're losing. If you're not losing on life, the 5 life means a lot less. I will say in Two-Headed Giant, it says an opponent. Now their life total is shared. So that's just your team's life versus their team's life. But you choose one of the 2 players on the opposing team. If either of them have more creatures than you, then you get a 3/3. And it doesn't include your teammate. So that's a big plus. And this card's obviously very powerful. You should generally first pick it and be very happy with it. Make a stand. 2 and a white for an instant. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible. There are things I like about this combat trick and things I don't. It's 3 mana for +1/+0 and indestructible. If you only have 1 creature out, or if your opponent's only, blocking with 1 creature and one of your creatures getting through, it's okay. It's a little pricey there. But the potential for this card is it saves your creatures. It makes you win more combats. So I think that this is a fairly strong combat-oriented card, and it rewards you for having more creatures, whether you have a lot of Eldrazi Scion or a lot of allies. There's token producers in both. They can take advantage of Make a Stand. And it can be used offensive and defensively. Last set we had the +2/+0 and first strike for sorcery. That was an offensive-only card. Some people really liked it. I wasn't as big on it, but the fact that it didn't have a lot of versatility other than being a game closer was a big deal. This is a worse game closer because you get 1 less power, but it can be used offensively, defensively, as a combat trick, so it has a lot more versatility. So for me, this is a B-. I won't usually first pick this card, but in the right deck, it'll be extremely powerful, and in just an okay deck, it'll service you fine. It'll be a slightly overpriced, solid combat trick. I don't think you want to run a ton of combat tricks in this format, just FYI, so this would probably be just one of the first ones I run. And also remember, if you're playing Two-Headed Giant, creatures you control is just yours, not your partner's. Makindi Aeronaut is 1 and a white for a 1/3 flying Core Scout ally. Again, everything's an ally. I think it'll be fine. If you want some defensive cards, it's decent there. The fact that it's flying is a big deal, right? Cards like Eldrazi Sky Spawner, which used to be top tier and not have any sort of predation in the skies, now have a little bit to contend with. I still think I would continue to play Eldrazi Spawner, but McKinley Aeronaut is a nice answer to that, and it's a nice answer to some other cards as well. Just being a 1/3 for 2 can be a really good way to slow the game down to your tempo, and if you don't need to slow the game down, it is going to get through 1 every turn. I would put this at a C, but I will probably pick it higher than other people, so I would probably rate it personally a little higher than that. I think most people should pick it about average. Mighty Leap, 1 in white. Target creature gets +2/+2 and gains flying until end of turn. Combat Tricks didn't do so well in Battle for Zendikar. I think Oath of the Gatewatch is going to replicate much of the same format. I think green's going to be better, is going to be the real difference, and go wide strategies will be better. So Mighty Leap, I do not think will be particularly powerful. For me, it's going to be a C-, a card I will play if need be, but I will not be excited to play. Mundos Vanguard, 4 in white for a 3/3 Core Knight ally. Doing a good job writing that big beast too, by the way. That is a ferocious looking picture. And it's our first instance of Cohort. Cohort always has the same activation cost, which is tap it and tap an ally you control, and then you get an effect. Mundos Vanguard's effect is put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. This is a game-winning effect. This card is a probably B, probably just a B, because you do need another creature, and we don't know how hard or not hard that's going to be to keep them on the board. But once you can activate Cohort once, you're really rolling. Like, once you get the one use out of it, you're usually about even on the card. If you get to go 2 or 3 times, you're just crushing. So let's talk a little bit about Cohort real quick. Like I said, the activation is always tap the creature and tap another untapped ally. Now, to tap the Mundos Vanguard, it needs to not have Summoning Sickness. But tapping an untapped ally is an outside activation source for that creature. So if I just played, McKinley Aeronaut this turn and Mundos Vanguard last turn, I can tap the Mundos Vanguard because it doesn't have Summoning Sickness, and the McKinley Aeronaut because it's not the McKinley Aeronaut's activated ability. So I can tap a creature I just played for the tap an untapped ally clause, which is a powerful effect. It means that you can play this on the empty board and next turn activate the Cohort without having 2 creatures without Summoning Sickness, which is a pretty big deal. The fact that Cohort is also an ability that you can use defensively. It's an instant speed ability. So you can attack with some creatures if they have vigilance, or more importantly, you can keep your creatures defensively up to block, and then after blocks or post-combat, you can use your Cohort ability when you please. Right? I can block with my Mundos Vanguard, a 3/3, tap it, and another creature that's also blocking, and now they're both 1 bigger, as well as the rest of my team. So Mundos Vanguard, very strong card. Cohort, an interesting ability. It has a high setup cost. It requires you to have multiple creatures. Those creatures all need to be allies, or multiple ones of them. And it requires at least 1 whole turn for that creature to live, unless it has haste. The payoff is you can use that ability every turn, hypothetically, as long as that board state doesn't really change, which is strong. Alright, so we've got the Oaths. Now, I will say this up front about the Oaths. They all have an ability and then a Planeswalker effect. We're just going to talk about the ability. The Planeswalker effect is no reason to play any of these cards. You just probably won't have these cards in Planeswalkers out. It's a constructed effect. 2 in white, legendary enchantment, which doesn't matter because it's essentially a sorcery. When it enters the battlefield, put 2/1/1 core ally creatures on the field. So, and then it has the Planeswalkers get an additional counter clause as well. You have to think about, does my deck want 2/1/1 allies? This is not a first pickable card. This is probably like a C-. Some decks will want to pay 2 in a white for sorcery speed, 2/1/1 white core allies. If they do, this card is for you. But don't get lost in the rarity of this card. It's not a powerful card for limited. It is a good support enabler. It is a good Cohort enabler. Undo War Cleric. 1 in a white for a 2/2 human cleric ally. Cohort, you gain 2 life. Alright. So here's the thing about it. 2/2s for 2 were not particularly spectacular in Oath of the Gatewatch, in Battle for Zendikar. I do not think that they're going to be particularly spectacular in Oath of the Gatewatch. I think it is an extenuation of that other format, with 5 color being better, and go wide strategies being better, and green being better, which means that it's not going to shine particularly. But they're important things. Being a 2-mana ally is important for Cohort. The fact that it can buy you time by gaining life when the games are going to go long, and you can gain life every turn just for tapping creatures that aren't really doing anything other than holding creatures back and tapping at your opponent's instance phase is nice. The fact that the black-white life gain deck is weaker, but still an option, is nice. These are all pluses to this card. Overall, I think this card is a C-. I'm not going to pick it at highly, but I do think it is significantly better than just a 2/2 for 2 because of the name Ally, and because gaining 2 life every turn, or many turns, is a decent effect, and you have a way to utilize this card. It's not just dead. Relief Captain is 2 white for a 3/2, Core Knight ally. And it's riding some sort of weird, creepy beast. And it has, when it enters the battlefield, support 3. Very strong. Now, when we get to a certain number of supports, it's going to be worse. How many creatures are you really going to have on the battlefield? 3 is quite a few creatures to ask for. We have 4 creatures total on the battlefield. Not unreasonable, but I think we're getting up to the upper limit of how feasible a card is. You know, somebody had support 20. Well, that's not really much better than support 5, is it? Or maybe support 4. How often do you have a ton of creatures on the board? Now, if this format's very grindy and there's often ways for boards to go very wide and stall out, the bigger support numbers do mean more. I think support 3 is a reasonable amount. If you get 2 counters out of this card, right, because that's essentially 6 power and 5 toughness for 4 mana. If you get 5 power and 4 toughness for 4 mana, you're still doing good. If you just support 1, you're doing okay. So I think this card's quite good. For me, it's a B. It's a card I'll pick up very highly. It lets me really enable having just multiple creatures. And I'm always going to be playing creatures. Like, support isn't asking you not to do... Support isn't asking you to do anything more than play creatures, which you will always be doing in Limited. Alright, so let's get to our first really kind of interesting combat-oriented spell, Searing Light. For white, it's an instant, destroy target attacking or blocking creature with 2 or less power. So there's a lot going on with the fact that 2 is where they're talking for power. If we go back up through the white cards, we see a lot of cards that are good with 2 or less power. This won't always be the strongest card. It won't always be useful. I wouldn't run 4 of these. In many decks, I wouldn't run more than 2. But what it does do is it gives a lot of defensive power. Because if you're attacking into their creatures, destroying their blocking creature means you didn't get through damage. That creature was blocked, and then you just saved your creature. It was a 1-for-1, and you didn't get through more damage because of it. Other than being able to have your other creatures necessarily go around that card instead of trade. But defensively, this means that you can leave up a mana and get rid of your creature opponent's smaller creatures. Like, if I had 3 of these, I'd probably play 1 to 2 my main board and pull in 1 or 2 out of my sideboard against some more aggressive decks. So this gives me thought that the slower formats will be... the format will be slow overall. Now, that said, Searing Light does kill like the 1/4 Vigilance we saw and a couple other kind of slower cards. And the other thing to think about is that support will put many cards out of the reach of Searing Light. Shoulder to Shoulder. Searing Light for me is probably a... for the first one, I'm going to pick it fairly aggressively, something like a C+. For the second and third, it's probably somewhere like a C-. There's a lot of slide as you get more of them, just because the first one's so powerful. Shoulder to Shoulder is 2 and a white, sorcery, support 2, draw a card. Now, it says up to target creature, so the worst case scenario for this card is 2 and a white, draw a card, which is not great. But the best case scenario for this card is, you know, giving 2 creatures 1/1 counter that can mean quite a bit and drawing a card. I'm not going to run a lot of these. I think this is actually like a C-. It is a cool card if you have a way to take advantage of the 1/1 counters, like evasive creatures, whether it's vigilance or flying or something like that. It means a lot more. 2 1/1 cards and drawing a card, or 2 1/1 counters and drawing a card isn't usually worth 3 mana, but if you don't have any other cool tricks or other things to make your creatures more relevant, it can fill that gap. I just don't like how bad it is when you don't have creatures. Like, it still does something, and that's fine, but it doesn't do enough for me to want it. Spawnbinder Mage. 3 and a white for 2/4 human wizard ally. First of all, I like those stats. It's a good defensive card. Those stats represent quite a bit of strength defensively. It can let you block a lot of creatures and trade favorably. Cohort, tap target creature. Wow, even better. Now, first downside. Cohort, tap target creature means that it's not as good on blocks in that you're choosing to block a creature or tap a creature. And to tap a creature, you have to tap 2 creatures. It's great to tap down their bombs, though. You can also block, then cohort, and then when it's your turn, you're in a better position to attack because you tap down one of their potential blockers. That's nice. Overall, I think this card's pretty powerful. It's a card your opponents are going to need to answer. But it's also important to remember that cohort, when it's doing a 1-for-1 ability, like tapping something down, you're using 2 resources to stop one of their resources. So you can't just use cohort to stop your opponent from catching up to you. That said, this is, for me, I think a C+. I would be happy to have 2 of these in my deck. It would be really nice. I don't know if I would usually play 3 just because I want a little bit more power somewhere coming from my cards. But if I had multiple token producers with a Spawnbinder Mage, I would be in a really good position as well. Tapping down creatures is a powerful effect, especially when you can do it instant speed. Steppe Glider. 4 white, 2/4 elemental. It is not anything else, it's just an elemental. Flying and Vigilance. 1 and a white, target creature with a 1/1 counter on it gains Flying and Vigilance in a turn. 4 for a 2/4 Flying Vigilance is good enough. The purpose of this ability will usually be to give your lands flying. Your lands are most likely to have counters, whether it's from Awaken in Battle for Zendikar, or they have other effects to give lands counters in this one as well. It means that you'll be able to put yourself in a decent position, and it works well with support as that crossover ability. Giving a creature Flying and Vigilance for 2 mana is very powerful. It lets it block and it lets it get through. So it's basically making a creature both able to do more damage and to play defensively well. And if your creature has a counter, it's probably bigger than a 1/1. You're probably looking at a decently sized creature. I think I would take Steppe Glider fairly high. For me, I think it's a B-. 2/4 flying for 5 is acceptable, although not the best thing in the world, but it's going to get damage through, and it's going to prevent damage pretty well. It's going to make a significant impact in combat. Stonehaven Outfitter is 1 and a white for a core Artificer ally, 2/2. Equip creatures you control get +1/+1. Whenever it dies, you draw a card. It's a rare. I don't think the equipment in this set, we'll get to that later, but I don't think it's particularly great. I don't think I'm going to be using this card as much more as than a 2/2 for a 2. If the equipment deck turns out to be better than that, or you get some of the rare and uncommon equipment, it could be alright, but I wouldn't really consider playing this as anything more than a 2/2 ally for 2 until you had several equipment. That said, if your deck does want a 2/2 ally for 2, whether it's for cohort, I think that's really the only reason, then you could run it. To me, it's like a D-, C+. Stoneforge Alkalite, 1 and a white for 1/2, core Artificer ally. Cohort. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal equipment, put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom. I don't know where I'm playing this, that I have so many equipments that's really strong. Like, I guess if I had a bunch of equipment, I have this equipment deck, but there's just not enough white cards that care about equipments, and like equipments at common just aren't very good. So, I mean, it is getting you cards if you're running all those equipment, but I don't think that's where you want to be at. I don't think this card is playable unless I'm missing the archetype, which would be like a Bonesaw Surge deck thing. We'll get to that later when we come along the Surge cards more often. There's not any in white. But I think this is just an F. I don't think you should be running it unless you want a 1/2 ally for 1, which you probably don't. And our last white card is a doozy. It's Wall of Resurgence. 2 and a white for an 0/6 defender. That's not as good as our 1 and a white 0/6 defender, but this has 1 more line of text, and it's an uncommon for a reason. When it enters the battlefield, you may put 3 1/1 counters on target land you control. It becomes an elemental with haste. Very strong. If you play this on turn 3, You'll have a tapped 3/3 that can attack next turn, which is great. That's how much I'd pay for a 3/3 is 3 mana. Now you do lose a land for that. Remember that if your creature dies, you're down a land. But if you play this later in the game, you're going to usually have another threatening creature as well. And with support, the elemental creatures, lands, will become much, much stronger. I think Walla's Resurgence is a card that I'm happy to play. It plays offensive great. It plays defense great. And it gives you multiple bodies on that. For me, I think this is probably a B as well. It's a card I'm going to first pick a decent amount of time here too. Overall, I think that white is good, but I wouldn't say it's great. With the exception of Wall of Resurgence, Mundos Vanguard, and Liliana the Preserver, there was no card that really, really shined to me as extremely strong. Maybe General Tezzeret, but I think that's about it. So we're going to just take a minute here. I'm going to swap the stuff over, and then we're going to go on to blue, guys. So give me just